cancer patients that a diagnosis is not the end of life, it's only the beginning. And so, if they take that approach and they don't constantly sit around feeling sorry for themselves, they'll have a lot better enjoyment of what life they may have left. And of course, find a passion that'll help you through the hard times. When I'm out there running, even though it can be stressful, I feel like I'm staying ahead of the cancer. That's an important thing for me to be able to run.
On this episode, we're going to get to know Dr. Phillip Fields. First and foremost, he's one serious and passionate marathon runner, an author, and a leukemia survivor. And he's a professor at the University of South Alabama College of Medicine, where he teaches anatomy. And we're going to talk about his cancer journey, how his diagnosis did not stop him from living his fullest life, and hear about his book, The Long Road Back to Boston. Cancer is just something that we all have to recognize, acknowledge, cope with, live with, struggle with, rage upon, crush, and even thrive with. This show is more than knowing and fighting or beating cancer. It's more than just relaying science, hope, and technology. Together, our purpose is to demystify cancer, take away as much fear out of the diagnosis, treatment, and process as we can, defeat its grip on our lives. This is The Cancering Show. Dr. Fields, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and thanks for allowing me to share my story as well as my book that I've written about this story. One thing about cancer, it touches so many lives, the patient, but friends, family members. All are being impacted by those three scary words: you have cancer. Of course, how you respond to those words is basically going to make a difference between whether the news is life-shattering or simply life-altering. And of course, life-altering is an understatement. There's probably not a day that goes by that you don't feel the effects of the cancer, which is constantly reminding you of its presence. And of course, then the question becomes who is going to be in charge? Will you allow cancer to be in charge, or will you be in charge?
I find that theme throughout your book and throughout what I've read of your story, your ability to listen to your body, which first took you to the doctor, and then consequences to that, your ability to kind of ignore your body even when it's screaming at you. How do you find yourself between those two extremes?
It's hard not to hear your body when you are constantly fatigued. And of course, I've been fortunate that I have a strong passion, and that's a passion for running. And so basically when I'm running, I don't focus on cancer. I basically just focus on the way my body is acting towards running, enjoying being out, just totally enjoying that experience. And I figure as long as I'm running, I'm still alive. So a positive for me.
I think something that immediately struck me was that your book is about running. It's not about cancer. It talks about how the cancer helped you define your goals and shape them. But I really appreciated that at the very end, you talk about that it was a journey that started in 1984 with your first marathon, not a journey that started with your cancer diagnosis.
The book is sort of a memoir, but I wanted to include all my experiences regarding running and how it became a passion, and then how that tied in with cancer. I know a lot of people have kind of been critical of the book because it didn't deal more on just the cancer. They weren't really interested in my background, but to me, that was an important aspect of that book, was having a passion and allowing that passion to help you through difficult times.
Absolutely. And I see that so much in my practice, not just people who have a support system, as you've described, or people who have a passion or a life's goal to get to, but even folks who have a very specific timeline. I have patients who have wanted to make sure that they reached a particular milestone anniversary or a wedding or birth of a grandchild that has really driven them to continue on in their cancer journey long past when that date given by a prognosis might have passed.
Yeah, I agree there completely. I think as long as you have a goal, you've got something that's to look forward to and something that's going to help you move forward until you reach that goal. And of course, once you reach that goal, then you immediately want to establish another goal for, longevity.
Let's talk a little bit about those goals that are in the book, the 50 states of marathons, and then the setting several goals after you reached it.
When I was at MD Anderson for a second opinion, my first diagnosis was at MCI with Dr. Butler, who's an amazing oncologist. I dearly love that guy. But so I went to MD Anderson for a second opinion. And as I was sitting in the doctor's office, he came in and he said, well, we can confirm that you have leukemia. It's aggressive and you have 5 to 7 years to live. And oh, by the way, you need to stop running for fear of rupturing your spleen and hemorrhaging. That was the worst news I heard, stop running. And as I sat there listening to the rest of his conversation, which had basically just become white noise, I really wasn't paying attention. I recalled something that my dad had said. We were trying to talk him out of smoking his pipe. And he told us when the doctors tell him that he can no longer smoke his pipe, they can cut his head off and throw it in the coffin with his dead body. Now, at 5 years of age, that seemed rather extreme. But when I sat in that oncologist's office at MD Anderson, I really came to light what Dad was saying. We're all going to die, so we may as well die doing what we love. And I love running. And so consequently, after following the oncologist's advice for about 6 months, I took up running. In the past, I'd run 2 to 3 marathons a year, but I decided I was going to take it to a whole new extreme. And I was going to complete a marathon in every state and DC by December of 2012. And of course, I started this goal in 2009. So that was going to be 51 marathons in 47 months. And it wasn't easy. Along the way, I ended up having to take a month off because of surgery on my calf for a melanoma. And then I had to take 3 months off because of a fractured sacrum. But when December 2012 rolled around, I ran that last state. And of course, now I'm without a goal. And you hear of so many people that retire and they really don't have a goal, and they die shortly after retiring before accomplishing anything other than work. And so I immediately set another goal to complete a marathon in all the Canadian provinces. And then after that as well, I want to run one in all the Civil War battlefields. And now I'm 6 states shy of doing the states a second time.
Amazing.
And after that, I'll establish another goal.
I hope it's not every country. That might take a while.
No, they do have a group of people that run a marathon in every continent. And I thought about that at one time, but the logistics, especially of getting to Antarctica, was a little too extreme and was going to take too much time. And that just kind of passed over my head, and as I shortly thought about that, but
yeah,
really didn't take it real serious. But it's incredible what some people are doing out there running marathons.
Absolutely. And as you've said, kind of constantly pushing themselves. I really appreciate that story. And I love that in the book you do talk about, setting that next goal and the one after that and the one after that and continuing to push yourself. How do you feel like that has played not only into the first part of your cancer journey, kind of getting through the initial hurdles of therapy and recovery, but really how it has played against the backdrop of your cancer in the years since?
Well, you constantly feel the fatigue that's associated with the leukemia, even after chemotherapy. I was assuming that after chemotherapy, really start to be able to run like I'd used to. But in fact, because of the effects of chemotherapy, my times got slower and slower. In fact, as I've got the anterior wall of my left ventricle doesn't pump. And so you constantly have that fatigue going on. But when I'm out there running, even though it can be stressful, I feel like I'm staying ahead of the cancer. That's an important thing for me to be able to run. I can't imagine not being able to. I know some people that are a lot better runners than I am that had an injury that ended their running career, and I just can't imagine that.
Yeah. Well, you've had several doctors tell you not to run. I think I enjoyed the interaction you had with your cardiologist. Do you want to tell us about that?
Actually, he was a student that I taught anatomy to, and he came through medical school, and his mother and I teach together. But Dr. John Ladue is at Providence, and he's an outstanding cardiologist. If you ever need one, I recommend him.
Good to know.
But at first, he thought I was crazy, for running, and he actually told me, he said, you're going to drop dead out there one day running those marathons. But since then, he's basically stood behind me and basically done everything he can to allow me to continue with my passion. I've had a defibrillator put in and atrial fib, and of course that left ventricle wall that doesn't pump. And most of that is, as a result of the chemotherapy, and a pretty devastating chemotherapy I went through.
Yeah, absolutely. And anytime a patient has a long-standing toxicity from the chemotherapy, devastating all around. But that particularly for you with running. But I so appreciated that you said, there are things that are more important than whether or not this is going to be the end of me, and that you're going to keep running even if that is a risk. And I think, there are a lot of times that we caution patients not to do X, Y, or Z. And it's like you said earlier, finding that passion really means that maybe that's okay. If the running career were to result in that, defibrillator going off, that maybe you still were doing what you wanted to do.
Yeah. And I've created 2 additional passions since then. So if running does come to a halt, I've got those to fall back on. One is raising money for pediatric oncology. I've done this through my running, marathons, talks I've given at expos at marathons, and through the sale of my book. And so far, I've raised close to $100,000 for pediatric oncology.
Oh, wow.
Different organizations. And then my other passion now is traveling with my brother and his wife to foreign countries. I got connected with an outstanding tour group called Gate One Travel. I mean, those people are outstanding, and they really know how to put on a tour. But we've now taken 6 European trips with them and have got 3 planned for next year.
Fantastic.
There's always something I can fall back on, take my mind off leukemia.
Well, those are both excellent. I am interested in the money specifically for pediatric oncology. Obviously, lots of kids have leukemia and lymphoma. Was that what pushed you towards pediatric oncology, or just kind of over and above that similarity in diagnosis?
You see these ads on TV, the Leukemia Lymphoma Society and Shriners, things like that, where they're concerned are with children. As an adult, you kind of have an appreciation for what's happening in your life, and you've had a long life, and so you've enjoyed that aspect. But with children, it's a whole new thing. They're probably more resilient than adults are when, given the word you have cancer, because they probably don't understand it as well as an adult does. And so it became a passion to, raise money for them, and instead of just adult research and things like that.
Yeah, no, I think that is amazing and exactly what is needed for pediatric research specifically, that we know their bodies are different than adults. And while the drugs may be the same, the reactions may be different. So it's all very appreciated. I did want to touch on one of the themes in your book was that cancer mentorship, being a mentor to other patients who are going through a cancer journey. Talk to me about what that has meant to you as a survivor.
It's been a chance to not only share my story, but to try to get the word out there to cancer patients that a diagnosis is not the end of life, it's only the beginning. And so, if they take that approach and they don't constantly sit around feeling sorry for themselves, they'll have a lot better enjoyment of what life they may have left. I mean, certainly leukemia is not as traumatic as some of the other cancers out there. And, I'm certainly not telling everybody to go out and start running for a passion. It's just, find what your passion is that can help you through the hard times. And, it may be gardening, could be reading, watching a sunset or a sunrise, and whatever you find that is enjoyable to do. Given talks to several cancer groups and shared photos of my travels and tried to tie it in with the story at the same time, and just trying to give people hope.
Well, I think you do that very well. I think your other passion comes into play here, that you're teaching. How did this affect your life as a professor in a medical school?
In terms of how I teach, probably has not affected that. Probably the way I look at people is different. I know I'm more compassionate than I was in the past. The thing I've always demanded of graduate students is hard work and perseverance. I still demand that of the medical students. Mm-hmm. And if I see that they're falling short of that, I kind of get irritated. probably why they refer to me as in not such good terms sometimes. They seem to think I'm the great intimidator.
I think all of your accomplishments can be a little bit intimidating at times, but certainly we want our physicians to have worked hard to get there and to persevere. And it sounds like you've produced some pretty excellent physicians in your time.
Yeah, and actually I'm seeing a lot of them now. Dr. Ladue was a student of mine, and Dr. Yarborough and Dr. Stakowitz. Just all excellent.
I appreciate the teaching of Dr. Yarborough. She's my physician as well.
Very conscientious and takes an interest and really knows your history, which is important.
Absolutely. Along the way, the book describes some of the low points, the injuries that you've described, and the times when folks have told you no or you can't or what have you, and some of the real high points. Walk us through that feeling of getting back to the Boston Marathon after everything else you'd been through.
Well, I'd run Boston, qualified for it. It's one of the few marathons you actually have to qualify for, and it's usually the time is based on your age, and so the first time I qualified for the 100th anniversary of the marathon in 1996, qualified there with a time of 3 hours and 25 minutes. And then after running that marathon the first time, it's one of those things you've got to go back and do again and again. And I went back again in 2004, and then I was training to go back in 2007. And I went out for a long run and could not make it more than about a mile with just totally being exhausted. And so I just continued that for 15 miles, and I knew that wasn't right. It just came on all of a sudden. Of course, coming on a sudden like that, thought it was heart related. But after a number of tests, about 6 months of different tests and things, I finally had a yearly physical. And that's surprisingly, that's the first time in all those tests that somebody took a blood sample.
Mm-hmm.
And so put me on to the fact that I had leukemia. And so I had hoped that by running all those marathons in all those states, I would be able to get back to the point where I could qualify again. But the fatigue was just too much, and I never could reach that qualifying time. And so what I did is, you can get in the Boston Marathon by signing up for a charity, a Boston charity.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you can raise what you decide you're going to raise 10,000, that's what the minimum was. And of course, you don't raise that 10,000, you've given them a credit card, and so they take that money out of your credit account. But I was fortunate and had a lot of really nice donors and raised the money, and was able to get a bib and go back and run Boston. And now I've done that twice. First time was with the Alley Foundation, which is a group that's set up to help kids from abused families. And the last time was with Dana-Farber Foundation. That one may be my last time to go. They have a time limit in that thing, and I can make the time limit in the past, but my condition's gotten such that it's hard to make that time limit. Now, there are people that have gone out there and stayed out there 10, 12 hours and to finish, but I'm kind of the mindset, well, if I can't finish in the allotted time.
While the pad is still across the finish. Right.
Yeah, that's such an incredible race. When I ran it in 1996, they said that probably the last 3 miles, there were probably 500,000 spectators. It's just, the noise is incredible. And the thing I remember most about that marathon is that at the very end, you always hear this saying that once you see the large Citgo sign, you're a mile away. And in that mile, you turn right on Hereford and left on Boylston. And that's just so sticks in my mind. And of course, once you get on Boylston, the finish line is about a quarter mile away. And what an incredible experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will tell you, I lived in Boston for 4 years. My house was right down the street from the finish line. So, the streets are alphabetical. So Hereford's H, I lived at Dwight, and then Tremont is just a couple streets off of Boylston. So we walked up and were one of those millions at the finish line, and just the look on the runners' faces. It is something to behold. Just, I don't know, just that, exuberance and jubilation that they made it. And you can see the culmination of, just as you've described, for what most people is years worth of a journey to make it to that moment.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I went with some friends. They had qualified for Boston, and so I went along and I stood on Hereford and watched the marathoners coming in. And I was there I got on the street in time to see the first place finishers and the men and the women's in the wheelchair, and then it was so incredible because that Hereford, it ends at the top of a little hill, and it just amazed me how many of the really fast runners were actually collapsing within a quarter mile of the finish. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm not the only one that does that. But what an amazing experience just to even watch that marathon.
Yeah. Well, I can only imagine, after everything that you have been through, that culmination of coming across the finish line again, that must have been really special.
It's something you never forget.
Before we close out, any advice you would give for somebody newly diagnosed with leukemia?
The first thing I would probably say is don't attempt the journey by yourself. When I started on that journey, I did do it alone. And I would say that the time I spent at MD Anderson, those 3 days, were probably the most depressing periods of my life. And I benefited by having a friend go with me in that. So always have somebody that you can turn to and that will share that experience with you, because it is really difficult when you do it alone. And of course, find a passion that'll help you through the hard times. And then be knowledgeable about the cancer. There's a lot of really good websites out there, cancer.gov. I have CLL, leukemia, and so I get newsletters from the CLL Society, which gives you updates. And not that you want to try to doctor yourself, but the more knowledge you have, the more you can share with your oncologist, run things by him. And that's what I enjoy doing with Dr. Butler, finding these new things, information about people that get the vaccination that have leukemia and whether or not they're going to develop antibodies.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, they're recommending with CLL patients, because that's a CLL society, to continue to wear masks and social distance, because right now they just don't have enough evidence that patients are developing antibodies.
Right.
I just recently was in the hospital, and as a follow-up, Dr. Yarborough she asked me if I'd had the vaccination, and I said I had. And so she wanted to do the antibody test. And apparently it came back positive. I did make antibodies to it, but
fantastic.
I'll still continue to be diligent.
That's, I think, advice a lot of us as oncologists are giving. Definitely get the COVID vaccine, even if it doesn't fully protect you from getting COVID. If you are exposed, it almost certainly will protect you from dying of COVID. And again, there's not a routine recommendation for testing for antibodies, but we may see that come about in the next year or two when we're deciding whether or not people should get boosters. And that may vary for patients depending on what treatment you're on. Some with the newer immunotherapies would be more likely to make antibodies, whereas folks on medications that are designed to suppress the immune system may not, and may need a booster when they're no longer on those medications. So we certainly will keep our ears to the ground here on the podcast to make sure our listeners get that most updated advice when it's available.
Of course, as my leukemia is coming back, I've stopped making IgG, IgA, IgM platelets. I was happy to see that I at least had some antibodies.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear that, but it sounds like you're set up for success with a good team and good support.
Yeah, I definitely have to make a shout out to Dr. Butler at MCI. I mean, what a wonderful person. He's very conservative in his approach, but yet he recognizes when more drastic measures may be necessary. I mean, he's one of the most compassionate doctors I've ever encountered. And actually, I think so much so to the detriment of his own health. He is a wonderful person.
He is just the kindest, most wonderful man. And as you've said, it shows us the true sacrifice of a physician. Sometimes we have to tell him it's okay to take a break or go home early. Did you want to tell folks where they can find your book if they'd like to read it? Tell us the title.
The title of the book is The Long Road Back to Boston, Running Marathons with Leukemia. And you can get this if you go to store.bookbaby.com and just search my name, the book will come up. Now, you can also do the same on Amazon. The reason I push the store.bookbaby, it's the same price, and they pay 8 times the royalty, as does Amazon. And so it generates more royalties for pediatric oncology. And what I'm going to do is any book sales that come in the next 3 months, I'll donate it to Women and Children's Pediatric Oncology.
Fantastic. We'll make sure our readers get that information. And we'll make sure to put it on the website as well so that everybody can find it. Dr. Fields, it's an honor and a pleasure to talk to you today. I am incredibly inspired, as I know our listeners will be also. Thank you again.
Well, thank you, and it's nice to meet you.
I am super excited to follow Dr. Fields as he finishes up all of the states a second time and maybe battlefields and see what he does after that. So listeners, please go check out his book. Search for it on Amazon.com, The Long Road Back to Boston, or check the show notes for the links we have added. Search for it on Amazon.com or check the show notes for the links we have added. That wraps up episode 23 of The Cancering Show. Next, we will talk with a cancer researcher about how environment exposures and our behaviors can affect our cancer risk.
Thanks everyone for listening to The Cancering Show with JYP, Dr. Jennifer Young-Pierce. Please subscribe, rate, and review this show on iTunes and anywhere else you listen to your favorite podcasts. Want us to deliver The Cancering Show to your email inbox? Contact us at cancering.com and we can make sure you never miss an episode. We would love to know what you think about the show, or if you have any suggestions on topics you would like to hear. You can reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, and cancering.com. Till next time, be healthy, happy, and always thriving.
This show is brought to you by the University of South Alabama Mitchell Cancer Institute. MCI is a cutting-edge cancer research and patient center built to fight cancer smarter in Mobile and Baldwin County, Alabama. Our researchers and clinicians focus daily on the struggle against cancer, serving a potential catchment population of more than 4.1 million people, with a singular focus of advancing cancer diagnosis, treatment, and prevention throughout the Gulf Coast and beyond, with science, technology, and hope. Want to know more about the Mitchell Cancer Institute? Visit us at usamci.com or search for us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Mitchell Cancer Institute is a member of USA Health. To learn more about all of our hospitals, clinics, and services, visit usahealthsystem.com.